In section 4.6, we're going to look at adjusting our budget. So in this section, what we're going to do is we are going to compare our actuals to what we budgeted. So you can see in this picture, I have one ball over here that's my budgeted amount. And that needs to balance out with everything that actually happened. So on the other side, you can see there's a whole bunch of balls balanced over there, and that the actuals are never really going to quite match what was budgeted, but they still need to balance out. And it says down in Proverbs 21:5, it says, "The thoughts of the diligent tend only to plenteousness, but of every one that is hasty, only to want." And what that really means is that if we are diligent and we stick to our budget and we compare our actuals with what we've budgeted, is that we're going to be able to honor God with our finances. But if we really don't have this kind of balanced out in any way, we're never really comparing these actuals to budgeted, we never know if we're really doing what we say we're going to do, and overall that's going to lead us to just not being very stable financially. Now, I mentioned your actuals are never going to match your budgeted. So even with the most well-planned budgets, your expenses are still going to be a little bit different. There naturally are always going to be some small variances month to month. So for example, you may estimate how much you'll spend on fuel, but maybe you drive more one month and you didn't plan on it and you spend more money on fuel. Maybe you go nowhere and you spend less money. Or maybe with food, maybe there's months where you have people over and you need to buy more food for some special events. Or maybe there are times where you've kind of filled your freezer and you've just got all these leftovers you have to eat. Or maybe even somebody gave you food from an event and you didn't have to buy as much food that month. Those are going to be small variances you're going to see month to month. There also might be times where emergencies are going to arise. Maybe something happened that month and you had to spend money, like you got a parking ticket. You didn't expect to get a parking ticket, but you got one and now you have to pay for it. That would be an emergency that's not a typical thing that would happen, but it was probably avoidable, but at the same time now you have to spend money on it. There could be instances where you forgot to include something in your budget. So at that point, if you forgot to include something in your budget, this would let you know as you compare those actuals to budgeted amounts, hey, there's something I forgot to include. I need to update my budget. There might also be instances where you budgeted a certain amount, but your spending really didn't match that amount that you budgeted. It could be for better or for worse. Maybe you thought, well, I need to spend at least $300 a month on clothing, but really you find you looked at the last year and you've probably spent maybe $150 a month on clothing. You really didn't spend that much. So, or it could be, I estimated that I need $1,000 for food per month, but really we end up spending $1,100 a month on food and I need to update my budget because I didn't know how much I was really spending. There's also instances where you don't leave enough room for margin. And what I mean by that is if you always estimate everything for best case scenario, that if something is not best case scenario, then you're going to go over budget. So for example, let's say you estimate $1,000 for food, and that means you got everything on sale and you were able to use every coupon and you went to all the different stores and you got the best prices. But in reality, you don't have time to go couponing as much as you used to. You don't have time to drive to 7 different stores, and you just need to go and get everything at different times and you're not as worried about it. So if you didn't leave room for margin, then that means that the budget really isn't accurate because you were too worried about best case scenario and you didn't look at your actual spending habits. In addition, sometimes economic conditions change, and at the time that I'm making this video, we are knee deep in a recession and we've had quite a bit of inflation over the last few months. And so for us, the budget has definitely changed for things like food and fuel and other areas like that. And then the last item I really want to mention is that sometimes we choose to overspend and we choose not to stick with our budget. And if that's the case, then your actuals will never match your budgeted, and basically you're not even using your budgeted amounts. So this really doesn't apply to you. I would hope that everyone wants to stick with their budget, and that by regularly analyzing and adjusting your budget, it will absolutely help you to create and maintain financial stability. And what I mean by that is that if you're not overspending your money, then you're not being reactive. You are then being proactive, and that does lead to peace. People who do not manage their money well are typically very stressed out. People who have emergencies arise and they can cover it, there's a lot less stress. You may not like the emergency, but now you're not worried about the emergency and money. You're only worried about the emergency. So by managing your finances well and managing them the way that God wants us to, we can honor God and we can be focused on being mission-minded with our money. So let's go on ahead and see a practice problem. So here I've got the budget that we established in the previous lesson, and what we're going to do is we're going to compare the amount that we budgeted with what we actually spent. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of fill out these columns here over here to see what my variance is. So there's no variance here because for the income, the amount that I budgeted was my actual. And you probably will find that to be fairly true if you're not an hourly employee. If you work salary or if your hours are fixed and you always work the same number of hours, your income will probably match. My tithes should match if my income matches, so there's no variance here either. I'm going to skip the savings for a minute because I want to look at all the other items here, and I can then determine how much I actually had from my savings account as well. My retirement, because my income matched, my retirement wasn't different. However, my housing ended up being a little bit different. I know for myself, when I budget my housing, I budget a whole number. And so when I actually pay for things, it's not always the same amount. So here, I was actually $10 under budget. So I'm going to show this as a positive number because I was favorably affected by this. This was a favorable variance, meaning that it was positive to me. Now my utilities were a little bit higher, so this was unfavorable. I had estimated $200 a month, and then I spent $220. That was unfavorable, so I'm going to show this as a negative 20. In accounting, you would actually see it like this with parentheses. I really like a parentheses, so I'm going to go on ahead and show it, but what that really means is negative. Food. I spent a little bit more money on food. That was an unfavorable amount. And then over here for transportation, I spent less. That was a favorable amount of $15. Clothing, I estimated $300. I only spent $200. That was a favorable $100. Activities, I spent a little bit more. I spent $50 more than I had planned. My vacation, because I'm just setting aside money for vacation, I still set aside the same amount of money. It didn't change. But miscellaneous, I did spend a little bit more, so this was unfavorable by $100. And then sticking with this because this was unfavorable as well, I need to put the parentheses on there. And then finally, my taxes, I paid a little bit less money in taxes than I had originally planned, which was $30 less. So these are kind of the variances I have when I look at what I actually spent versus what I budgeted. Now, up here it said calculate your total actual expenses and the increase or decrease to the savings account. So you'll see here that I left this number blank. And the reason I did that is because basically once I pay for my income and I cover each one of these items, how much money do I actually have left over that I can even put into the savings account? And so the first thing I want to do is I want to see how much were my expenses by basically having this plus all of these items here. How much is that in total? And when I add all of those numbers up, this is going to give me, I'm just going to write down here, $6,055. That means that without the amount I put into savings, I have $6,055. Well, now I get to figure out how much I actually had left over that I could actually put into my savings account. So if I spent $6,055 for the month and I made $6,600 for the month, how much was left over? Well, I had $545. And so with my $545, I can put that in here. This is how much actually went into the account. Now that is unfavorable because really I didn't put $660 in there. I actually put $550. So I was actually missing out on $115 that did not go into my savings account like I had hoped. Now, once I put that amount in my savings and I add each one of these up, I would say that my budget now is $660. I kind of have nothing left over at that point. This isn't really anything we need to worry about. And over here, I would say we're not really going to worry about this number here. What this helps with, though, is looking to see, was my budget realistic? And were there things that I need to update? So for example, if I know my housing is always going to cost $690, I really could change this to say $690. I could change that. That would not be a problem. Utilities. If you have monthly billing and it's called budget billing and you know that it's always going to be $220, then you would want to change this. If it's not something where it's the same amount every month, because we are not on budget billing, we decided to pay our utilities as we use them, then this amount will vary month to month and I won't want to change that. With the food, I can see that I went over quite a bit on my food. I would want to think and analyze, why did I go over? Is this because prices for food went up? If so, I need to update my budget. If it was just because I had a few special events or I ended up making an extra trip to the grocery store, then no, I'm not going to change that. Each one of these categories, you would ask yourself, why is this different? That would be the opportunities for updating the budget. If it's different because it's always going to be different, then update the budget. If it's something that changes here and there and it's not always going to be over or under, then don't update the budget. And the other question you would ask yourself is if it's close. If it's within 10% or so of that number, you probably don't want to update it anyways. If it's something that's hugely different, like it doubled or it tripled, or maybe it's half, at that point, you probably would want to consider updating your budget. So my recommendation would be to look at each one of these variances, analyze why there's a variance, and if the variance is something that's always going to occur, update the budget. If the variance was a one-time event, don't update the budget.